There comes a time when you stop playing their game and start owning your power. You were never created to beg for respect, to shrink for someone else's ego, or to lose yourself just to be loved by a broken soul. When you choose to stand firm, speak truth, and no longer feed their need for control, something shifts. The manipulator begins to lose grip. The one who tried to dominate starts to follow. You don't fight fire with fire. You rise with authority. Because when you honor your worth, even a narcissist bows to the strength. They can no longer manipulate. Silence is not weakness. It's wisdom dressed in restraint. In a world where narcissists thrive on chaos, attention, and emotional reactions, silence becomes the most underestimated yet effective weapon you can wield. It confuses, disrupts, and exposes the manipulator for who they truly are. A narcissist feeds off your voice, your outrage, your explanations, and your pleas. The more you engage, the more you empower them. They need you to respond so they can twist your words, exploit your emotions, and paint themselves as the victim while casting you as the aggressor. But when you choose silence, you take the stage away from them. You remove the fuel from their fire. You make their tactics useless. A narcissist can't stand silence because it confronts them without confrontation. It forces them to face their own emptiness without the distraction of your energy. When you respond with calm, calculated silence, it is not avoidance, it's authority. You are saying, you no longer have access to my peace. Silence doesn't mean you're accepting abuse. It means you're choosing to rise above the drama and not stoop to the level of dysfunction. It allows you to regain control over your emotional state. Narcissists operate by pushing buttons and provoking reactions. When those buttons no longer work, they lose control, and that loss rattles them to the core. Silence protects your energy. You no longer waste your breath trying to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering validation to someone who never intends to value you. In silence, you find your strength. You begin to see how much power you gave away just by engaging in the cycle. When you stop talking, you start seeing. You start hearing your own thoughts more clearly. You begin healing from the lies, manipulation, and confusion they used to keep you trapped. Silence gives you space to rebuild your inner voice, one rooted in truth and no longer distorted by emotional games. The narcissist doesn't just want control, they want reaction. They crave the satisfaction of seeing you unravel, of knowing they still have power over your mind and emotions. When you give them silence, they are left with themselves, and that is a space they cannot tolerate. It is in that void that their illusion begins to break. They start to question their grip. They may try harder at first, poking, provoking love, bombing, gaslighting. But when your silence remains unshaken, They realize the old tricks no longer work. It forces them into a panic because their control mechanism has malfunctioned. You've removed their oxygen, and now they suffocate in their own tactics. Silence is also a message. They hear it louder than words. It says, I see you, and I will no longer entertain you. It communicates boundaries without yelling. It sends a signal that you are not their toy, not their victim, and certainly not their property. And over time, it conditions them. When they learn that manipulation is met with indifference, not emotion, they start changing their behavior. They start adapting not because they've had a change of heart, but because they've lost the audience that kept the show going. Your silence teaches them that you are not afraid to walk away, that you don't need closure from someone who was never open to truth, that your healing doesn't require their participation. You take back your identity, your peace, and your purpose one quiet moment at a time. You rise not with loud resistance, but with sacred stillness. Because when you stop feeding the fire, the flames eventually die. And when the noise ends, the manipulator is left powerless, alone with their own echo. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates to protect what is sacred within you. When dealing with a narcissist, the boundaries become a lifeline, a declaration that your mind, your emotions, your peace, and your presence are not open for manipulation. Emotional control is the weapon narcissists wield best, using guilt, fear, charm, and intimidation to trap you in a cycle that serves their ego. But the moment you draw a line, the moment you say, enough, you disrupt the pattern. You send a message that the game is over and the rules have changed. Narcissists hate boundaries because they expose the limits of their power. They thrive on access to your time, your thoughts, your reactions, and your heart. When you allow them unrestricted access, you give them the freedom to twist your emotions and shape your reality. But when you begin to enforce boundaries, you cut off the supply. You stop allowing emotional manipulation to dictate your behavior. You stop explaining yourself to someone who never intends to understand you. You stop dancing to the rhythm of their moods and demands. And in doing so, you reclaim your rhythm, your pace, your choices, your clarity. Setting boundaries is not about punishing them. It's about protecting you. It's about drawing a sacred line around your emotional health. It means deciding that you will no longer allow gaslighting to confuse you, nor silent treatment to control you. It means that love without respect is not love, and presence without peace is not worth tolerating. Boundaries demand self-awareness. You begin to identify what is unacceptable, and you stop tolerating behaviors that cost you your dignity. You no longer negotiate with manipulation. You no longer stay silent to keep the peace. You no longer shrink to keep someone else comfortable. Breaking the cycle means Recognizing that narcissistic control feeds off your compliance. Every time you bend your boundaries to avoid conflict, they learn they can push further. But when you stand firm, without apology, without guilt, you teach them that access to you is a privilege, not a right. You teach them that love has limits and respect has requirements. Yes, they may push back. They may try to guilt you, shame you, or paint you as the problem. That's part of the control. But don't be surprised when your strength begins to expose their weakness. Your clarity reveals their confusion. Your boundaries show them that emotional control is not love. It's dysfunction wrapped in charm. You begin to see how they used your empathy against you, how they blurred lines to maintain control. But now, the lines are clear. You answer calls when you choose. You walk away when they raise their voice. You no longer over-explain, overgive, or overstay. You start to realize that peace is not found in pleasing them. It's found in protecting yourself. And something powerful happens when you stand in that truth. They start to lose interest. Not because they've changed, but because their tactics have stopped working. The emotional hooks they once used to keep you entangled no longer reach you. Your boundaries don't make you cold, they make you wise. They don't make you mean, they make you healed. You're no longer reacting, you're responding with clarity. You're no longer waiting for them to change. You're choosing to change how you show up. And when they no longer have control over your emotions, the entire power dynamic shifts. You break the cycle not by fixing them, but by protecting you. You stop trying to change the narcissist and start choosing to protect your peace, your power, and your purpose. Self-respect is not just a posture. It's a shield that protects your identity from being rewritten by someone else's control. When you carry yourself with self-respect, you naturally dismantle the power structures narcissists rely on to dominate and manipulate. They function through superiority. They must be seen, obeyed, feared, or admired. But when you refuse to shrink, when you know who you are and what you deserve, their need to dominate suddenly becomes unnecessary, ineffective, and exposed, because a person with self-respect does not play in emotional games. A person with self-respect sets a standard that cannot be bent by charm, threats, or shame. Narcissists prey on insecurity. They poke at wounds. They subtly undermine your confidence so they can position themselves as the center of your world. The more they can control how you see yourself, the easier it is to dominate you. But when you walk in self-respect, their tactics lose potency. You no longer believe their gaslighting. You no longer internalize their insults. You no longer look to them for approval because you've already approved of yourself. And then that terrifies them because control only works when you don't know your worth. When you begin to carry yourself with the dignity you were born with, their manipulation bounces off the armor of your awareness. Self-respect means you know your value, even if they try to devalue you. It means you don't stay just to prove a point. You don't explain yourself to be heard by someone who refuses to listen. You don't argue to be right with someone committed to misunderstanding you. Your peace, your energy, your time, they're no longer up for negotiation. The moment you say, I am not tolerating this, you take away their throne. You show them. They are no longer the authority in your life. They may scream louder, try harder, play dirtier, but nothing can penetrate a mind anchored in truth. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to seek revenge. You don't even need them to understand. Because self-respect is not about controlling them. It's about controlling what you allow. You begin to respond differently. Where you once begged for clarity, you now walk away from confusion. Where you once tolerated disrespect, you now leave the table. They realize they can no longer dominate the narrative because you've taken back the pen. You're not driven by desperation. You're guided by discernment. That shift is more powerful than any argument, more final than any goodbye. When you respect yourself, you don't need closure from chaos. You don't ask questions that only bring more pain. You understand that not every relationship deserves access to your vulnerability. You stop chasing the illusion of change and start embracing the reality of your strength. And that reality sets you free. Free from guilt, free from confusion, free from manipulation. They may accuse you of being cold or selfish, but in truth, you've simply woken up. You've realized that the person who deserves most loyalty from you is you. Self-respect strips away their need to control because it removes their leverage. They no longer have emotional currency in your world. Their silence doesn't scare you. Their love bombing doesn't woo you. Their insults don't shake you. You've outgrown their strategies because you've grown into your power. And once you taste the peace that comes with honoring yourself, chaos will no longer feel like love. Their dominance only existed in the space where you doubted yourself. But now that space is filled with self-trust, self-love, and self-respect. And in that space, they no longer reign. Confidence is the silent language that speaks louder than fear, louder than begging, louder than emotional chaos. When you walk in confidence, you become unrateable to a narcissist. You stop playing by their unspoken rules. You no longer react to their games, nor do you shrink beneath their criticisms. Confidence confuses their tactics because it dismantles their ability to control your emotions. Narcissists are skilled at spotting weakness, insecurity, and doubt. Those are their entry points. But when you exude confidence, it sends a message they can't decode. I am not here to be controlled. I am here to be respected. Narcissists manipulate through uncertainty. They plant seeds of doubt, twist your reality, and chip away at your self-belief. They want you questioning yourself, so you'll turn to them for validation. That validation is their weapon. It keeps you dependent, keeps you pleasing, keeps you submissive. But when you know who you are, when you move with quiet assurance, when you no longer ask for permission to be enough, their entire playbook falls apart. Confidence tells them you don't need their approval to feel worthy. You don't need their attention to feel seen. You don't need their games to feel alive. When you're confident, you're not easily baited. The insults that once triggered you now sound like noise. The guilt trips that once derailed you now bounce off your strength. Narcissists thrive on control, and control requires emotional reaction. Confidence starves them of that supply. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending what doesn't need defense. You stop proving yourself to someone who's already made up their mind. Instead, you stand still, centered in who you are, unshaken by their attempts to unseat your peace. They don't know what to do with someone they can't rattle. Their confusion grows when the same tactics that once pulled you and now push you further away. They may accuse you of arrogance or coldness, but the truth is, they're just meeting a version of you they can't manipulate. A confident person is a mirror narcissists hate to face because it reflects their powerlessness when met with self-assurance. It reveals how little control they actually have. And the truth is, they never had power over you. You just hadn't claimed it yet. Confidence comes from knowing that your value isn't up for debate, that your presence is not a plea, that your life is not defined by how someone else perceives you. When you carry that energy, you stop attracting chaos. You stop allowing access to those who cannot respect your peace. You don't respond to emotional bait because you no longer have a hook in your soul for them to grab. You've done the inner work. You've cried the tears. You've survived the gaslighting. And now you've risen with clarity, with conviction, and with calm. That calm is your crown. That presence is your power. Narcissists often test confidence by pushing boundaries or sabotaging peace. But your response, steady, direct, and unmoved, teaches them that you are no longer a participant in their performance. You're not an audience. You're not a victim. You're not playing. You are present, powerful, and free. Confidence doesn't mean you never feel fear. It means you no longer let fear speak for you. You make decisions rooted in truth, not trauma. You no longer need to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. Their tactics stop working when your identity is no longer tied to their validation. That's when the cycle ends. That's when their manipulation becomes powerless. That's when they realize you cannot be dominated, controlled, or silenced. Because confidence doesn't argue, it simply walks away, head high, heart whole, and future unshaken. Reaction is the currency of control, and narcissists spend it with precision. Every time you react, whether through anger, tears, confusion, or desperation, you give them the validation they crave. They measure their power through your emotional response. If they can make you defend yourself, question your worth, or chase after their approval, they know they're winning. But when you stop reacting, when you refuse to give them that energy, something shifts. You disrupt the power dynamic. You break the pattern. They're no longer leading the dance. Suddenly, they're left performing for an audience that has gone silent. Narcissists depend on emotional chaos. They know how to trigger you, how to bait you, and how to manipulate you into reacting in a way that paints them as the victim while casting you as the aggressor. They thrive when they control the narrative. But when your reaction is no longer automatic, when your peace becomes untouchable, they lose control of the story. You stop explaining, you stop defending, you stop feeding the fire, and without your reaction, their tactics fall flat. They start to feel powerless in the space where they once felt in control. Your stillness becomes the loudest answer. It speaks louder than shouting matches, longer than drawn-out arguments, and deeper than emotional breakdowns. It says, "You no longer have access to my peace." That message breaks something in them, not because you've hurt them, but because they've lost the thing they need most: your emotional supply. Narcissists are not built to deal with indifference. They don't know how to handle someone who won't fight back, who won't fall apart, who won't beg or justify. Your silence makes them uncomfortable, and in that discomfort, they begin to shift. They start to realize that manipulation isn't working. The old tricks aren't pulling the same responses. So they adapt. Not out of respect, but out of necessity. They begin to follow the new rules you've silently established. They start obeying the boundaries you no longer verbally argue about. They may not admit it, but they feel the shift. They notice the detachment. They feel the loss of power. And in the void left by your non-reaction, they begin to adjust their behavior in ways they never did when you were emotionally invested. This isn't about playing games or trying to dominate them in return. It's about recognizing your worth to the point that you no longer argue for it. You don't prove yourself. You don't break down to be seen. You don't react because they've lost the ability to reach your core. You've built an inner peace that can't be bought, shaken, or manipulated, and that peace becomes your strength. The calm you walk in becomes the standard they must now meet if they want to be in your presence. Narcissists hate losing control, but they especially hate losing relevance. When you stop reacting, you take away their relevance In your emotional world, you're no longer centering them in your decisions, your responses, or your mood. They realize they're no longer the source of your validation or your pain. That realization breaks their illusion of power. It flips the script. Now they're the one waiting for a response, hoping for attention, craving reaction. But you've outgrown the chaos. You've learned that peace is not passive. It's powerful. Your refusal to react becomes the boundary they never saw coming. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. But it is transformative. And in that transformation, they learn either to change or to lose access, because your silence is no longer silence, it's structure. Your lack of reaction is no longer indifference, it's authority. And slowly, without words, they begin to obey the rules written by your healed self, the version of you that no longer dances for approval, no longer breaks for validation, and no longer reacts to gain control, because you've realized the most powerful response is no response at all.